Good morning, this is Rabbi Elton from the Great Synagogue, and welcome to our Rashi class for this morning. We're looking at the third Aliyah, the third portion of the parsha of Emor, which begins in chapter 22, and we're going to look at verses 18 to 22 this morning. We're back in the world of sacrifices. We've had a bit of narrative in previous parashiot, and now we're back in the world of sacrifices, which Vayikra, the whole book of Leviticus, deals with to a very great extent. And this is looking at which sorts of animals are appropriate to be brought to sacrifices. That is to say, not the species of the animal, but the condition that they ought to be in if they are suitable as sacrificial offerings. So let's have a look at Leviticus Vayikra chapter 22, verse 18. Daber el Aaron, ve'el banav, ve'el kol bnei Yisrael. Speak to Aaron and to his sons, who are also going to be the priests, of course, ve'el kol bnei Yisrael, and all of the children of Israel, ve'amarta alehem, and say to them, this is God addressing Moses. Ish, the doubling of the word ish, any man, mibeis Israel, from the house of Israel, umin hager b'Yisrael, or any stranger in Israel. Now, ger, of course, has more than one meaning. A ger tzedek is a convert, is a proselyte, and sometimes when the Torah says ger, it means a convert. Other times, when it says ger, it means a stranger. A ger toshav, it means somebody who is not Jewish, is not Israelite, but is living in the Israelite community. And both Israelites and non-Israelites are entitled to bring sacrifices in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, or later in the temple. So any Israelite or resident alien, asher yakriv korbano, who brings his sacrifice, lechol nidrehem or lechol nidvosam, and now we have two different legal descriptions of a sacrifice. A neder, a word we know from kol nidre, a vow. So one assumes an offering that one makes a vow to bring. Or lechol nidvosam. And any nadava. Now, nadava is also a colloquial term for an offering you make at shul. You make a nadava, you make an offering or a donation to the shul. So two words which have survived in some form into our present practice. Asher krivu lashem lola. Any of these items, these offerings which they bring to God as a burnt offering. And olah, same word as aliyah, is an offering that goes up entirely. It's entirely consumed on the altar. Nothing is left behind to be eaten by either the priests or the person bringing the offering. So let's see what Rashi says. What's nidrehem? What's a neder? So he says, hare olai. He says, that is an offering about which you say, alai, it's on me. I make a commitment, I make a promise, a neder, a vow, to bring a certain offering. It's an offering which comes out of accepting and placing a commitment upon oneself. That's that sort of offering. And nidvosam, what's a nadava? So harezo, when you say this animal over here is going to be an offering. So it's not the legal process of designating or establishing the obligation to bring the animal is not by the means of accepting an obligation on oneself, I'm going to bring an animal. It's by designating the animal in a certain way. So, in the case of a neder, one alters one's legal status. You're now a person with an obligation to bring an offering. And in the case of an adava, you alter the legal status of the animal. This animal is now designated to be a sacrifice on the altar. So, two different mechanisms in order to bring about an animal being designated as an offering. And now the next verse. So you can bring different types of offering, and what's the point? Lirtzon chem. Now this is the word that Rashi is going to be very interested in. Lirtzon chem, and it means, I suppose, literally for your will. That doesn't make much sense. Ratzon we know means will, but what does lirtzon chem mean in this context? So lirtzon chem, for your will. Tamim has to be perfect. Zachar, and male, has to be a male animal. Babakar, from the herd. Baksavim, from the sheep. Uvaizim, or from the goats. So it has to be a cow or or a sheep or a goat. Now Rashi says about liratzon lechem, for your will. So haviu davar haroi, you have to bring an appropriate animal, a fitting animal. You don't bring something which is maimed and has a limp and one eye's been knocked out. You don't bring such an animal as an offering on the altar. That would not be appropriate. That would not be roi. That would not be fitting or seemly. L'ratzos eschem lefonai, in order that, as it were, God's ratzon, God's will, God's goodwill, God's will to look kindly upon the person who's bringing the offering should be prompted. We have a very familiar phrase, Yihi ratzon milfanecha. We say to God, may your will be before you. May you express your will in a way that is favourable to us. And that means the same here. So in order to prompt God's ratzon to be directed in our favour, this is what we have to do. We have to be perfect male and either a cow, a sheep or a goat. And Rashi continues, Shehei lechem l'ratzon. It should be for you, God's will should be for you in a favourable manner. And then he gives the French, as he often does, appeasement, balaz. In Old French, the word is appeasement. God should be appeased by our offering. Ve'ezehu haroi l'ratzon. And what is the sort of animal which will bring out God's ratzon? And that's why the verse continues, Tomim zachar babakar, etc. Male, perfect from these species. And about that section, that Rashi says, you'll notice that section only talks about mammals. It doesn't talk about birds. And Rashi notices that distinction, or rather the ancient rabbis do, and he brings their comment. So this requirement that it should be male and perfect only applies to mammals. Aval ba'ola sa'of, but Rashi says when it comes to the offering of a bird, ein sarich tomus v'zachrus, there's no need for it to be either male or perfect, or other way around in fact. It doesn't need to be absolutely unblemished, and it doesn't need to be male. Ve'eino nifsal b'mum ela b'chesron aver. It can have minor defects, it just can't be missing a limb. If you bring a bird offering, then it can have some sort of minor defect in it, but if it's missing a whole limb, then it's no longer acceptable as an offering on the altar. Now looking at verse 21. Ve'ish ki yakriv zevach shlamim lashem. Now a person who brings an offering which is known as a shlamim. We came across this idea of a shlamim a few weeks ago, I think just for Pesach. A shlamim is sometimes called a whole offering or a peace offering, but in some sense it represents a wholesomeness or completeness. And now we're talking about that sort of offering. So you bring this sort of offering Lashem to God, lefale neder, as a neder, or lindava, either a offering that you have taken upon yourself an obligation to bring, or you've designated an animal to be a shlamim. But we're a bit confused at this stage about what this word lefale means. Lefale neder, what's lefale doing there? Rashi will explain. And you bring it babakar from the herd of cattle, or batzon, or from a flock of sheep. Tomim yer, it should be unblemished. L'ratzon, in order to achieve God's favour. Kol mum lo yebo, it should have no defect or blemish in it whatsoever. Now what's this word, or this phrase, lefale neder? So, lahafrish b'diburo. We said before that when you make a neder regarding an animal, you make a vow regarding an animal, you say, I take upon myself to bring such and such an animal as a offering to God. And Rashi is saying here, you must do that verbally. You can't do that mentally. So in order to make a neder, make a vow to bring an animal as a sacrifice, you can't just sit there with your eyes closed and think, I'm going to bring next door's cat as an offering in the temple. You couldn't do that anyway because we can't bring cats. But I'm not going to bring next door's sheep either. That wouldn't work. You have to say, I'm going to bring the goat that lives at number 27 as an offering to God. It has to be expressed verbally. This is true in almost every area of Jewish life where we have to remember things, or we have to think about things, have to mention things. We can't do it merely internally. So, for example, we're currently at the time of counting the Omer, the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot. You can't count the Omer by thinking about it. You have to count the Omer by actually saying, today is the X day of the Omer. Or Kiddush. The purpose of Kiddush on a Friday night is to remember Shabbat. We don't do that by sitting at home quietly and thinking to ourselves, I remember that it's Shabbat. We have to say that it's Shabbat and talk about the importance and status and greatness of Shabbat. In Judaism, when you're told to remember something or do any action, mental action, that must be done not by an entirely internal process, has to be somehow signified by an external process, minimally has to be done by speaking and saying. That's why, by the way, one can't just look at the Siddur and read the words. You have to somehow enunciate them, even if only very quietly. Now, what are the different types of different types of blemish that would disqualify an animal from being brought in the temple? So, averes, if it's blind, or shavor, or it's somehow crippled, it's been broken somewhere, or charutz. Charutz is a word we're going to look at its meaning in a second. Or ya bele, so it has warts, or gorov, or ya lefes, or it has different types of sores or scabs. Lo sakrivu ela al Hashem, you should not bring such an offering to God. Ve'isher lo sitnu mehem al mizbeach Hashem, and you're not going to put any of them on God's altar as an offering to Him. Now, what's this charut? What's this particular type of blemish which renders an animal unfit to go to the altar? So, ris shel ayin, she nizdak, or she nifgam. If its eyelid has a split in it, there's a cut in the eyelid, or there is a piece cut out or missing from the eyelid. V'chein tvaso, she nizdaka, or nifgama. Similarly, when its lip also has a split or a piece cut out with it. This became rather important in Jewish history at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. When the Zealots, who were one of the parties in Jerusalem at the time of the Roman occupation of the land of Israel, in the years approaching the year 70 when the temple was destroyed, when they wanted to pick a fight with Rome, they decided they would no longer accept offerings from the Romans. Now, we learnt in the very first verse we looked at this morning that anybody can bring an offering, send an offering to the temple. So it was against halakha, it was against Jewish law to exclude this offering, an offering from the Romans. But they wanted to provoke them in order to start a fight. Now, of course, the temple authorities would not consent to reject an acceptable offering, and so somebody came along and maimed an animal sent by Rome in this way. I think they cut the eyelid, and that meant it had to be rejected, not because it was from the Romans, but because it had because it had a blemish. And this rejection of the Roman offering ultimately led to a big confrontation between Rome and the Jewish people, which led to ultimately led to the destruction of the temple. That's a story told in the Talmud in Gittin, in Tractate Gittin. So lo sikrivu, you shouldn't bring. So lo sakrivu, you shouldn't bring any animal which has one of these defects in it. Now this phrase lo sakrivu, you should not bring, shalosh pamim, it occurs 3 times. Now we know that the Torah does not waste words, and so when the same injunction, for example, appears 3 times, it's teaching 3 different things. The most famous example of that is you should not see the kid in its mother's milk. That instruction appears 3 different times over the span of the Torah, and therefore covers 3 different prohibitions. You shouldn't cook meat and milk together, you shouldn't eat milk and meat together, and you shouldn't benefit from meat and milk cooked together. And similarly here, because the phrase lo sakrivu appears 3 times, it also has 3 different prohibitions. Lashir al hak dashatan, you shouldn't designate a blemished animal as a sacrifice. Al shechitasan, you shouldn't slaughter it as a sacrifice. Va'al zerikas damam, and you shouldn't sprinkle its blood as a sacrifice. 3 different elements of the sacrifice procedure: designation, slaughter, and sprinkling the blood. Each of these is individually prohibited. And finally, the very end of the verse, the isha lo sitnu, you shouldn't make a fire offering out of them. So, as haras hak tarasan, this refers to burning them up on the altar, another element of the sacrificial procedure. This is also prohibited. So it turns out there's 4 different prohibitions which relate to bringing an animal with a defect. You can't designate it, you can't slaughter it, you can't sprinkle its blood, and you can't burn it up on the altar. Each of these is prohibited separately and distinctly. Thank you for joining. I hope everyone stays well and has a good and healthy week. And please God, we should only hear good news for Australia and the whole world as we tackle the current crisis. God bless.